Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the BCP Standards Committee, 12th of January 2021. My name's Councillor Steve Barron, and with us this evening is Councillor Nigel Brooks, Councillor Marcus Andrews, Councillor Derek Borthwick, Councillor Andy Jones, Councillor Chris Rigby, and Councillor Anne Stribley. If I could pass over to Nicky Hooley for some housekeeping, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Evening, everyone. Note this meeting of the Standards Committee is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. In order to ensure the meeting is managed effectively, please could everyone present follow the ground rules for speaking. Only speak when invited to by the Chairman. Please always turn on your video function when invited to speak. Please state your name before you speak if you have not been introduced by name. Some people may need to dial in. I don't think we have that on this occasion. Please mute your microphone when you are not speaking. If you would like to speak on an item, please do so by utilising the raise your hand feature in the bar at the top of the Teams window. The messaging bar should not be used unless you are raising a point of order or providing the wording for a motion. Please remember that the panel is visible to all and subject to public information requests. If at any point you would like to speak again, please use the raise your hand again. And please clear these when you have finished speaking. If at any point there are any recommendations moved that require a formal vote, these will be carried out by the Democratic Services Officer, carrying out a roll call of members present and asking for a response of for or against or abstain. Finally, please can you keep background noise to a minimum, and mobile phones and other devices are switched off or on silent for the duration of the meeting, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicky. Okay, so we'll move on to agenda number 1 on the agenda, which is apologies. Have we received any apologies for this evening?
Thank you, Chairman. No apologies have been received.
Thank you very much. Number 2 on the agenda, substitute members. So presumably there's no substitute members.
That's correct, Chairman.
Thank you. Number 3 on the agenda, declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest for this evening, please? It's a long, comforting silence. That sounds good. Thank you very much. And we move on to the confirmation of minutes. I presume everyone's had a chance to look through the confirmation of the minutes from the last meeting. Is everybody quite happy with those?
Agreed.
Agreed, Chair.
Yes.
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. It's certainly how I remember it, and thank you very much to the officers for putting all those together for us. Number 5 on the agenda, public issues. Do we have any public issues?
No public issues have been received.
Thank you. Okay, so we move on to item number 6 on the agenda, which is the review of Register of Gifts and Hospitality. So if I could hand over to your name, Jones, Officer Jones, please.
Thank you, Chairman, members.
Sorry, apologies for that. I was just looking at two screens at once.
No problem at all, Chairman. Good evening, members. This report, items on the agenda, I'm not intending to go through in detail through the report, but as a quick introduction, the Constitution requires that you receive a report on an annual basis detailing the register of gifts and hospitalities relating to councillors. Councillors are, just to remind you, councillors are required to declare gifts and hospitality offered to them with an estimated value in excess of £50 and to indicate whether or not they were accepted or rejected. We send out monthly reminders to all councillors to remind members of that responsibility and duty, and attached as Appendix 1 to the report is a schedule for the period 1st of April 2019 through to the 31st of March 2020. This report, I should say, is later than we would normally have planned, but due to the COVID pandemic, that's caused a delay, but we will return to normal schedule from 2020-21 report, which will be reported to you on the 6th of July after the year end. Agenda item 9 on your agenda, I don't wish to jump ahead, but refers to the new model code of conduct published by the LGA, which includes details of 15 best practice recommendations from the Committee on Standards in Public Life. Recommendation 5 in that suggests that local authorities should update their register at least once per quarter and publish it on a website. We don't do that at present, but the recommendations include an item that suggests that we should commence that from the 1st of April 2021 and report that on a quarterly basis in accordance with that recommendation. Furthermore, the process at the moment is quite manual. Officers update upon receiving the details of declarations. We update the schedule. There is a facility in our online system that would allow members to register those themselves on a self-registration basis. And again, we're asking members to really support that we explore that further. We will, of course, provide members with guidance and assistance in that process. But it would assist in clearly and avoid duplication of effort on officers' basis. That report, that self-registration, would then be used to update the quarterly report that goes onto the website. So your recommendations in the report are that you review the register of gifts and hospitalities for councillors, make any comments, recommendations in respect of the content, and support the introduction of a quarterly published declaration in accordance with the best practice recommendations. Happy to answer any questions, Chairman or members, and obviously Susan Zeiss, your monitoring officer, is also in the meeting to answer any queries.
Thank you very much, Richard. Councillor Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. It seems a good idea, and I can't think of any reason why we shouldn't adopt that practice. It would certainly, I think, be better for it to be published quarterly than to wait a whole year when something's maybe really far too historic. But I'm wondering if we should pass that recommendation to the Council's Constitution Working Party so that it could be also built into our updated Constitution. I'll take some advice on that, but I'm happy to support the proposal anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stribley. Richard, have you got any comments on that suggestion?
I've not got any particular comments. I don't think that's a constitutional issue. I think that's a procedural issue in that respect. If we did introduce the online self-registration, that would automatically publish details under each councillor, but not in the format that's required by that best practice recommendation. So it would be very much more up to date and live when councillors update their system, the details.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to take advice if it's not considered a matter for being put in the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stribley. Councillor Andrews, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, obviously this takes us up to the end of March of last year. Yes, last year. Clearly, obviously, from the 23rd of March last year, we've had the lockdown. So I would imagine, and the officers can probably clarify that the number of items of hospitality and entertainment or gifts or whatever is probably substantially down. So perhaps a quarterly one, isn't going to throw up that many. The other thing which I spotted in the new code of conduct, and I don't know whether this is in the current code of conduct, it's on page 47 of the agenda this evening. It says that the councillors will register the monitoring officer any gift or hospitality with an estimated value of at least £50. Now, obviously, going through this very quickly, quite a lot of the items listed here is, a sandwich, tea and cake, buffet lunch and everything like that. So I would have thought actually probably half of these items which are listed here for that calendar year or the council year fall below that £50 limit. Do we actually have a sort of limit at the moment, or do we have to report everything?
Chairman, through you, the limit is £50 as well, but clearly councillors, the requirement is at least £50, but if members wish to declare items below that value for openness and transparency purposes, then they are at liberty to do so. And I can't comment on, I haven't got the data in front of me in terms of the current year, but you're right, I'm sure it is significantly less than the schedule you have before you today.
Chairman, could I just add to Richard's comments?
Of course, please do, Susan.
Thank you. Just to say there is some emerging thinking on whether or not, while it's not a requirement of the Code of Conduct or the law, we should ask for an additional column to be added to the register indicating the value of the gift, either accepted or refused. But that's a question of choice for the council. It's just something I would put into the mix for the future.
Yeah, okay. Marcus, have you got anything else to?
Well, no. You know, obviously, as we move further and further into this electronic age, you know, mobile phones and apps and everything like that, you know, hopefully with the IT department's assistance, you know, the ability to report these or add these to the register can be improved or simplified, whereby perhaps taking to avoid taking up too much officer time of writing things down and then having to type it in, you know, the actual member can go on, obviously perhaps with a PIN code, and actually insert the information themselves, thus saving, you know, some officer time.
Okay, thank you. So is everybody in agreement with the recommendations?
Agreed.
Item 6.
Agreed.
Agreed. Agreed.
Agreed.
Marcus, you in agreement, or did you rather?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's unanimous then. That's as far as I can tell. Thank you very much. Okay, so if we can now move on to item number 7 on the agenda, which is the Code of Conduct Complaints Review. I'll hand over now again to Richard Jones. Sorry, Andy Jones, Councillor Jones, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, apologies. I just wanted to make a comment on one of the complaints, but I don't know whether Richard wants to do his introduction first, and then I'll come back. I was a bit too quick off the mark there.
Okay, yeah, that's not a problem. Thank you, Andy, and over to you, Richard. Thank you.
Again, Chairman, thank you. I'm not intending to go through in detail, but just to remind members, this is a standing item on your agenda. It provides a summary of the complaints that we've received since the last meeting in October. Complaints that were previously shown as closed have been removed. So those that are shown as closed were previously pending or new and you've dealt with. There are currently 6 pending complaints in the schedule. We've updated the schedule, I should say, in terms of the nature of the allegation to be consistent. So it describes the nature of the allegation rather than a summary. This will perhaps provide us with the ability to do some analysis going forward on the complaints and the nature of the complaints and which categories they fall into. The report is actually for noting. You obviously deal with your complaints outside of this process, so it's for information only. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Councillor Jones, Andy Jones, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just in respect of complaint BCP 21. One of the parties recently stated in an email to the committee via the monitoring officer that he was not prepared for the complaint to be dealt with through mediation as recommended. I'm just wondering what options do we have now in moving this forward? And obviously, as we said before, you know, complaints need to be looked at and dealt with thoroughly, but of course, obviously in a timely manner. So I was just wondering how we can best progress this, and what options are available to us.
Thank you very much, Andy. I think it's a good time for Susan to come in on that, please.
Thank you. Richard could answer this equally, but thank you very much, Chairman. I am waiting for one last response from all the parties concerned in connection with that particular complaint. Once I've received that, I think I will come back to the informal group of this committee to put forward to you various suggestions. One being that you go to full investigation, which is an opportunity under the Constitution, whether you, because we can't force members to go into mediation. It's a question of participating voluntarily. So the option would be to go to full investigation with all the costs and associated resource draw that would entail, to either accept the status quo of the previous decision of the committee and remain at that decision, which was to ask for an apology, which was then not forthcoming, or to choose another determination by the committee of the complaint by informal means. Richard, did you want to add quickly before we go back to Councillor Jones?
No, I think you've covered it all, Susan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Andy. You quite happy?
Yes. Sorry, I was just coming back on what Susan is. Again, do we have a time frame on how we can move this forward, or when we can expect to move this forward?
Well, I will be chasing up with the last remaining councillor concerned this week, and I would hope to get it onto your consultation agenda as soon as possible. Richard did mention to me today a meeting that we were having in the near future, so if in fact that meeting is still going ahead, I will be attempting to put this matter back on the agenda, yes. So Richard, you may remember offhand, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think it's quite soon. I think it may be as early as next week, but we'll come back to you on that.
Appreciate that, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Derek Borthwick, please.
Yeah, I understand this part of it, but I don't understand the final part. What punishment or admonishment can we make as a recipient who may be at fault? What can we do about it? Well, we can't take a pound's wages away or suspend him. I just wonder what the right. We all would agree that this is not correct. He's well out of order here, he or she, as it may be. What can we do except just revert right back to the guy or the lady? I've got to be careful. I mustn't miss the ladies out. I just wonder what the next stage is. I've found Joe Brown guilty of something. What can I do about it? Richard?
Richard or Susan, really, on that one?
Susan, I'm happy to make a start, but you can obviously correct me if you wish to. The sanctions are limited. There are no sanctions to disqualify councillors, which is very often a remedy that complainants will seek. I have repeated previously for the Standards Committee that my aim, or I think our aim, is to change behaviours and improve behaviours through appropriate means. So normally apologies is also acceptable to the complainant, so we would go down that line. Susan's mentioned mediation in respect to this complaint. There are other things you can do, so you can remove resources from councillors, you can make recommendations that they should be removed from committees through group memberships and so on. You can invoke training, but the ultimate sanction of disqualification is just not available to councillors in the review. Susan, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
No, that's correct, Richard. And also the Committee for Standards in Public Life has made a number of recommendations, including some changes in legislation to government, but the additional sanctions of potentially suspending councillors or withdrawing allowances require legislative change, and they are not in place yet. So they remain as part of the recommendations from that committee to government.
Yeah, I have known in the past that people have lost their computer for a couple of months if they've been a pest for a few months. In the old Bournemouth Council, we did take somebody's computer away because he was just a nuisance at the end of the day. He's no longer a councillor, by the way. So otherwise I'm quite happy that at least we've got some power of doing something about it. Starting with the apology, I accept what you're saying, and maybe with the government changing its rules, it might give us a little bit more clout one day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Borthwick. Councillor Andy Jones, is that a historic hand up, or are you coming back in on that? Sorry, you're on mute there, Andy.
Sorry, it's a historic hand. Apologies.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Brooks, Nigel Brooks, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think some of the comments from Susan and Richard actually answer this. I trust that the new LGA application of the Code of Conduct will not act retrospectively, And also I see that the Government Committee of Standards in Public Life may subsequently also come forward with matters of code of conduct, which I trust in both cases cannot act retrospectively. But I trust if a case is still running, when these new codes of conduct come into place, they could in fact actually apply to the case that we're hearing at the time. Your views, please.
Thank you. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. We would apply the code of conduct that is in force at the time of the actions that are being complained about. So we have done that retrospectively also with complaints in relation to the former proceeding councils. So it was the code that was in existence at that time. So it wouldn't apply retrospectively, and you wouldn't take that into account if an offence occurred again. Susan, I presume you have the same view.
I do, and I know we'll come on to the model code of conduct in more detail in a later item, but I think it is written in a way that makes it more apparent that this is really a contract or a pact between members and the council and officers to behave in a certain way, more like a contract between us or a promise. So I'm hoping that will reinforce to everybody concerned that the values that underpin. It may not help us enormously, the new code, with the complaint that Councillor Jones mentioned earlier, but certainly with some of those on the list, yes, particularly because of the area that will mean that if you appear to be acting as a councillor at the time of using social media, you will be construed to have been acting as a councillor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you, Richard. Councillor Stribley, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just as a question, I suppose, if we'd had a complaint against a member which the Standards Committee had felt bound to uphold, but that member, if you like, refused to apologise or comply, we could be in a difficult situation, but would in effect that member be named in our report to council and in that process named and shamed? Because normally I think we just say, you know, so many complaints were dealt with and satisfactorily outcomes agreed or whatever. But is that an option, and would we ever be likely to do it? Thank you.
Mr. Stribley. Susan, you've got your hand up there. Thank
Chairman, through you, and Richard will have more information about what has been the practice of this authority hitherto. But in my experience, what was done once at a previous authority was that a more full report was taken to full council in the instance of a situation that arose like that. And in fact, at the last minute, the member concerned agreed to make that formal apology in full council. But I think it might have been precipitated by the fact that a report was going forward, indicating that an apology had been required, but not given.
Thank you, Susan. So has anyone else got anything else to say on this item at all? No? So is everybody happy that they've noted the contents?
Thank you, Chair.
Yep.
Sorry. Yes, Chairman. Thank you.
Very much. Okay. Then we'll move on swiftly to item number 8 on the agenda, please, which is consideration of report in respect of a complaint against a councillor. And I'll hand over to Richard, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I'm not going to go through the report in detail, but a very brief introduction. The report provides the committee with the conclusions of the investigation that was referred for independent review against Councillor Hall. Again, because this has been referred to an investigator, coming back to the previous question, we do report this one to members. The details and the names of the complainant have been redacted to ensure that this report remains open to the public for transparency purposes. The full report is attached to Appendix 1. The conclusion of the investigator is that there was no evidence to support the allegations. and that Councillor Hall was not acting in his capacity as a councillor in the meeting itself. He was actually a member of the public in that capacity when speaking in relation to a planning application. The committee is therefore asked to consider the investigator's report and accept the recommendations. Again, happy to answer any questions, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Richard. Councillor Nigel Brooks, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I read the independent investigator Janet Keeley's report with a lot of interest. I've noted the final recommendations in paragraph 9. But I was concerned to read in 8.12, which is the matter of handing of a note by a Mr. Jones to the legal officer. Whilst it does not centre on Mr. Hall, I just find it rather surprising that this comes out in that Councillor Jones was previously a chair and also a committee member of Christchurch Council Planning Committee, and he is currently chair of Christchurch Town Council Planning Committee. They are matters of fact, and I'm just surprised that Mr. Jones did not know considerably better that handing a note across in a meeting to the legal officer was not something that should be done. I note at the end of the report under 9.3 that the complainant still feels that this was undermining the planning committee by the handing of a note during the planning committee meeting. I know this is aside to the matter of Councillor Hall, but nevertheless it does raise concerns with me that Councillor, as he is with Christchurch Town Council, should know better, being a long-standing committee member on planning, both for a preceding authority and a current authority, that is the Christchurch Town Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brooks. But both myself and Councillor Stribley were on that planning committee, and if my memory serves me well, it was noticed and it was picked up on pretty swiftly. Is that how you remember things, Councillor Stribley?
Yes, more or less, and I would say I wouldn't have thought and certainly didn't think it affected the outcome or the thinking of the members of the planning committee.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back, because the chair of the committee actually then read out the statement that was passed to him by a paper, which clearly must have influenced the committee members. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to say it didn't influence me. I can't speak for anyone else. Thank you, Nigel. Councillor Rigby.
Thanks, Chair. I want to say that I really welcome this report. Reading through it, it's a really good and detailed report which was done, and I think the findings of it, because when we first looked at this in the informal group, I think there was quite a lot of documentation, a lot of references to what had happened on the planning committee and such as well. So to go through all that, and I believe it was the another monitoring officer from a different authority who's done this, I just think it really got to the crux of the matter really well, and came out with the result as it is, that there was nothing there which was potentially breaking our constitution from the point of view of a councillor. So yeah, I think this method of investigating is quite welcome in using a different monitor officer and not maybe always going to a independent investigator like we have done with a couple of previous reports from an outside body looking at different monitoring officers from different authorities. I think it's worked quite well. And the other thing, just picking up on what Councillor Brooks said there about the note being passed, I just want to mention in it how quickly the chair of the planning committee picked up on that and asked the members to disregard it as soon as it came up. And I just think that's really good for the chair to be so on top of that and knowing what they should be doing at the time as well. So yeah, all in all, pleased and happy to accept the recommendations in the report. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rigby. Thank you. Councillor Marcus Andrews, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's in the report when we've had other discussions about this that every planning application that a councillor whilst there are a sitting councillor, puts in, I believe has to go to a committee, even if it is a couple of panes of glass, or if it's a big, office block or whatever, it has to go to committee. Obviously, this planning application for a domestic item would have normally been dealt with under delegated powers with the planning officer, who would, if there was a situation of that they perhaps couldn't grant the planning application in its entirety as originally submitted here, may well have contacted the applicant and may well have contacted the next door neighbour, the one that was going to be overlooked potentially, and sorted it out, perhaps even at a site meeting, perhaps even discussions literally over the garden fence. Obviously here, with our procedures of all applications having to go to committee, obviously it got escalated, and the result is what we see. But obviously that is because so that the public can see that things are being dealt with openly, that it has to go to committee. So say, I think I'll be absolutely right in saying that ordinarily, if it was a private individual making such an application, unless a councillor red carded it, it wouldn't have come to committee.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Thank you. Susan, you've recommended that we take on board and we accept the outcome. Have you got anything to say on that?
I have, Chairman, because while there may be some discomfort, and I can't come down on either side of this, around whether or not the content of the note influence the decision makers, I think I can compare it to what sometimes happens in the court, where when there's a jury and there's an inadvertent piece of evidence submitted, and the judge needs to say to the jury, please discount that particular piece of evidence. You can never be absolutely sure that nobody took, some slight notice of it. But I think all the correct procedures were followed. I think the officers advised in the meeting, and the chair did address the problem immediately. So we simply don't have any evidence that there was collusion behind the scenes, or that either Councillor Jones or Councillor, I don't know if he's Mr. Jones now, or Councillor Jones or Councillor Hall had some plan. We simply don't know. We've spoken with the investigators, spoken to both of them, and they've denied it. And without any other evidence, I think this is a sensible conclusion for the investigator to have come to, and I do recommend it to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Marcus, is that a historic hand up there? Would you like to come back?
Yes. No, I'll take it off. Okay. Apologies.
Thank you. Not a problem. Has anyone else got any input? And is everybody in agreement that we accept this? Oh, Derek Borthwick.
Yeah.
Derek, thank you.
It's just that I feel, how was the setup in the planning room at Christchurch? Did you sit in a long line or in a square? Are you able to see what everybody's doing, in the seating plan? Like we're here, have we got an ex-member of Christchurch Council planning with us?
Yeah, well, both myself and Councillor Stribley were there that day, and from memory, it was a long row of tables with a sort of L shape at the end, and I think Councillor Stribley and myself were on the L shape at the end, towards the right, and then to the left-hand end, it was the chair and the officers. So yeah, the public gallery, so quite easily see pretty much everything from certainly from where I was.
Yeah, I can't work out why there's no definite story. Was there a note or not a note? Both parties have got a different story, and I was just hoping that someone in that layout would have seen something, but unfortunately,
a note was seen to be passed, and it was picked up on pretty promptly and brought to the attention of the chair. I can't actually recall whether the chair noticed, but but it was picked up pretty promptly.
And the chair never read it out. If he saw
it was read out. Yeah, it was read out.
Most chairmen would have got the note, read it, and then decided he was going to make the rest of the committee aware of what note's just been passed. That's the correct thing to do, you know, but obviously, you know, I don't know how Christchurch Council work. All right, yeah, okay, I'll send my party, please. Thank you.
Chairman, just to summarise again what the investigator found, and that was that the note was passed by Mr. Jones, according to the investigator's evidence that she gathered, from Mr. Jones to by various routes to the chairman. The chairman read it out before the Democratic Services Officer had the opportunity to stand up and indicate that that was an incorrect thing to do. Once the chairman realised that it was inappropriate for him to have received this note and in fact read it out, he then indicated to the committee that they should disregard it. There is no evidence that Mr. Hall introduced, Councillor Hall introduced the note. The only thing the investigator found for sure was that Mr. Jones passed the note up to the chair. I hope that clarifies.
Thank you very much, Susan. Councillor Stribley.
Chairman, I propose we accept the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Is anybody in objection to that?
No, I'm happy to second that.
Okay. So I'm not seeing anyone objecting to that. So, yep, thank you very much. So we'll move on to the last item on the agenda, which is item number 9, Local Government Association Model Councillor Code of Conduct. And I'll hand over once again to Richard Jones. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman and members. Members will have received the report and the eagerly awaited new model code of conduct. I know you've been seeking this for some time. The new model code is attached as Appendix 1 to the report. Just a bit of background, the existing code that you have was adopted by the Shadow Authority on the 21st of February 2019, and the Standards Committee is responsible for recommending changes to the code to Council. However, what we've already discussed, obviously various things, the Committee on Standards in Public Life has undertaken a fairly comprehensive review and made a series of recommendations and best practice to the government in relation to the code. The new code does address a number of issues that you have been seeking to have included, and that is clearly welcomed. But I need to, in the report, I just highlighted section 7, 3 key recommendations from the committee for best practice that require or imply a requirement to do engagement with stakeholders and interested parties in relation to the code before adopting it. So whilst you could proceed with adopting the model code and make a recommendation to council either as it is or with some modifications, one of the alternative and is recommended is that we do await the outcome of the government's consideration of those recommendations, although I would caveat that with saying we haven't got a timeline for that, so that could be an issue that you wish to discuss, and to then go out to consultation on both the existing code that we have and the new model code to interested parties to seek views. The recommendations are set out on page 35 A to C. I'm not going to read those in detail, but in summary, you welcome the new model code, but await the outcome of the government's consideration of the recommendations. We undertake consultation with interested parties, parish councils, community organisations, etc., on those codes, and we report back to you in April 21 with the outcome of A and B. I should have probably mentioned that the Audit and Governance Committee are also looking at the arrangements for or the whole of the Constitution, including the arrangements for handling complaints, and therefore we could report back to that same meeting with the views at that point on of the Audit and Governance Committee's working group. So again, happy to answer any questions, Chairman, or if Susan's got any additional items that I've missed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Richard. Susan, would you like to go into before we start with questions?
Thank you. Nothing additional to add, but just to say that I had an email from my counterpart at Dorset Council today, reminding me and the monitoring officer at Swindon that there is a joint code of conduct for the fire authority, and to inquire as to when our council was going to consider the model code, because it's Dorset's intention to adopt it, and there is a hope that it will be adopted by all the parishes across the whole of the Fire Authority area, as well as the whole of Dorset as a county. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan, for that. Councillor Andy Jones, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to say, I think this is an excellent report, and I think goes away in terms of underlining and I think clarifying a lot of issues that we've talked about around complaints over the months. Just a couple of the recommendations to underline. Recommendation 1, I think it is, provides for a definition for bullying and harassment, and also lists some practical examples of such. And I know as a committee we've looked at numerous examples of these, which to my mind have not been proven. So I think it's really important to have some clear guidelines on this. And I was really pleased to see it in the Committee for Standards in Public Life report. And also recommendation 6, again, I was particularly pleased to see, which states that the council should publish a clear and straightforward public interest test to which allegations are filtered. I've thought for some time, and I know probably other committee members are the same mind, I really do think we need something like this. To my mind, this has been very unclear and has undoubtedly led to the volume of complaints that we've seen to be dealing with, and a number of which have obviously lacked substance and detail. And I know we've had a couple of those recently where we found it really difficult to move them forward and make a decision. And I think someone like this could really help in weeding out perhaps some of the councillor versus councillor complaints, which seem to be taking up more and more of our time. So, but all in all, an excellent report, and I'm really happy with the recommendations.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones, and very good points there. Councillor Nigel Brooks, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think, as all members, this awaited when we first understood the Local Government Association were undertaking this review. And I'm so pleased to see on page 41 of our document, and on the top of page 42, where it says the application of the code applies to all forms of communication and interaction, including inter alia in electronic and social communication, posts, statements and comments. I think, having had a number of cases before us, this is so central to what actually needed to be tightened up. And I'm sure that we firmly welcome these kind of changes that should actually then come into the Code of Conduct for our own council. I'm just a bit concerned that if the Government Committee of Standards in Public Life and their recommendations comes forward, they are mentioning sanctions, and that may be something we have to think about quite a long time about. But I just get the feeling that government are so involved in matters to do with COVID and Brexit that this actually could take an awful long time to come out of the committee. And therefore, I think after due consultation with other authorities, by April, we should, as a committee, make a firm recommendation that if the government haven't come forward, then the Local Government Association recommendations for a code of conduct should actually be put forward to be accepted by full council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. So a very good point. Thank you. And Councillor Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with both of the last two speakers. I think if a complaint comes in, it's absolutely essential that there is clear evidence with that complaint. One can't just say, oh, somebody's bullied so-and-so without some explanation or evidence to that effect. And the same with everything else, because we have had too many complaint councillor on councillor, I think, just to be a nuisance or to fly a kite or to settle scores. And that is not the purpose of the Standards Committee. We should be upholding the best possible standards in public life, and also expecting our colleagues to do the same. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything needs to come to the committee, and certainly if there's no evidence, it should not do so. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stribley. Councillor Rigby.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a quick one. I agree pretty much with everything which has been said so far. I just want to quickly draw attention to how this new report is written. I really like the way the language has been used in it. It's written almost more as a pledge which councillors would sign up to, saying, you know, I treat other councillors and members of the public with respect, rather than councillors should or councillors should not. It makes it a little bit more personal to what everyone's doing. I'm hoping, we've spoken in the past about use of language and things like that as well. And I just hope that making it a bit more personal and something which you almost agree to rather than a list of rules will help us stick to the code of conduct, should I say, and make things easier for us, and hopefully we'll have less complaints forthcoming because of the clarity in it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rigby. Good points again. And Councillor Marcus Andrews, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I've read the report and all the recommendations. Just two or 3 points. I think, you know, when people elect a councillor, you know, as a representative of their local community, they obviously do expect that councillor to perform things to do with the council, and perhaps even in private life, probably at higher standards than normally could be expected. You know, they are representative of the local area and the BCP area as a whole area. And, you know, we actually have had quite a few complaints against councillors which have fallen at the first hurdle because they weren't acting as a councillor. I did hear a comment from one councillor where we dismissed it fairly early on. Oh, we're not going to consider it, whereby they said, well, actually, I stand by what I said. You know, I would have liked it to be considered because, you know, it was something which I passionately believe in. Now, the officers have highlighted from Appendix C of the report 3 or 4 best practice items which I've noted. I've looked at them, and there's 15 in total, and there's a couple more which I would like to emphasise or bring to fellow committee members' attention. For example, best practice 3, that the code of conduct should be readily accessible for members of the public and councillors. You know, obviously on our website, but you know, one comment about councillors having that new code of conduct when it is available, readily accessible, is a good idea. Chris has mentioned that, you know, it's got very good and it's user friendly. As to whether IT could even put a shortcut on all councillors' laptops, whereby they don't try to have to find it somewhere or other, they can actually click on their laptop and instantly the document will appear on their screen. That's just a suggestion. Whether it's possible for IT to do it, I don't know. Another one, best practice 8. It talks about filtering some complaints because they're trivial or without merit. Now, obviously, we actually do have this sort of filtering process. Here it suggests that an independent person helps filter it, but we actually have some informal meetings which help filter out some of the ones which are without merit. And another one, last one, it says that senior officers should meet regularly with political group leaders or group whips to discuss standard issues. Now, I believe that sort of happens already, whereby I believe, obviously Richard can fill me in with the details, I think there's a weekly or at least a fortnightly meeting with group leaders. Now, whether they all turn up on Teams or have IT issues and they can't turn up, I don't know. But that is possibly a way where Councillor Borthwick was saying, well, what powers or sanctions can you have against councillors who don't do the right thing, is potentially for, you know, the membership of a group to be suspended, or potentially for the group leader to actually consider removing a councillor from a committee or threaten to. Now, so you know, I hope those meetings with group leaders are taking place where and it could be a forum for resolving some of these issues that where we think to ourselves, well, what can we do to resolve the complaint? You know, what powers do we have? I think one of the issues, obviously, with this BCP Council is actually there are quite a few groups on the council. There's 2 larger groups, but there's quite a few small groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. We've got, I think there are historic hands up, Councillor Jones and Councillor Stribley. Are they?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to come.
Okay, sorry. Off you go. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, just wanted to come back in, just sort of picking up on what was said previously, I think by Councillor Andrews. I mean, certainly as the Conservative group whip, I have regular conversations with the leader of our group regarding issues around councillors and obviously councillor complaints, etc. So that certainly does take place from our perspective and my perspective. So I can't obviously comment on the other groups, but certainly myself and Councillor Miller have a regular dialogue and obviously discussion around disciplinary issues. And just another point, I've just wondered whether we have any information from other local authorities, perhaps, I don't know, Dorset Council, in terms of how they deal with the councillor versus councillor complaints, whether they have the same or a similar volume to us, whether they're filtered in the same way. I mean, I think like most of the group and people that are members of this group, I mean, I'm quite concerned by the vast numbers that seem to be coming before the committee at the moment. Obviously, through the initial discussions, and obviously then to this committee as well. I mean, it does seem to be something I think we somehow or other need to get a handle on, and maybe perhaps try and filter out some of the more spurious complaints that we're seeing.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Susan Zeiss.
I just wanted to come back on what Councillor Jones said. I don't have numbers to hand. Richard and I can certainly make some inquiries and find that out. But as for the way in which they are dealt with in other authorities, I can speak from my own personal experience that there is not the same provision in the Constitution that requires these matters to be escalated immediately to the chairman of standards, irrespective of the nature of the complaint. And certainly in Northamptonshire, and I know when I was in Dorset Council previously, or Dorset County Council previously, there would have been an informal discussion between the monitoring officer and the person complained of, as well as the complainant, and that would almost always include the independent person by way of a quick phone call to gauge a view or sound out. And I don't know whether or not Councillor Barron would like to update the committee on the working group's view on how they might be taking an amendment to the Constitution forward.
Thank you. Yes, I think we were discussing it really, that as initially for the monitoring officer to assess a complaint before it comes to us really, because a lot of these complaints could have been sort of stopped at the first hurdle, and I think that's probably a good way forward. Councillor Jones, is that still?
Yeah, just really coming back on what yourself and Susan said. I agree. A lot of these complaints certainly should not have got as far as they have, and certainly we've spent a lot of time as a committee, particularly over the past probably 6 or 8 months. These complaints, councillor versus councillor, and a lot of them are sadly lacking in sense and probably no more than partisan disagreement. So I think if we can find some way or other of trying to nip some of these in the bud by using whatever means possible, I think really we should be doing that.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Nigel Brooks.
Yes, thank you, Chair. When it's a matter of councillor on councillor, at the back of my mind, it's always tainted with this aspect of it being a political position, and a political position can then be quite useful when it actually gets into the media or into the press, and I think that's more damaging to the council as a whole, and it's not really recognised by the complainant or the party responding that this is unhelpful to the council as a whole. So I agree with Andy, if we can comb out some of these before they actually get to committee, it would certainly help us and also certainly help the council.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brooks. And it is also very costly in officer time as well, which we have to consider. Has anyone else got any matters they want to raise? Nigel?
Yes, just coming in, thinking of then progressing, it was mentioned about governance, audit and governance. Is it not, though, a case that from this committee we can make recommendations to full council? I just think if it gets into another committee, it can actually take an awful long time, knowing how other matters have had to come through that particular route. Do we have guidance from Susan or Richard that that actually can come from us to full council? Thank you.
Yeah.
Over to you, Richard.
Richard.
Thank you, Susan. The recommendations. So your committee is responsible for recommending to full council the code of conduct. So all other aspects of the constitution are for the audit and governance committee to make those recommendations. At the working group, we did say that as we start to formulate some of these ideas, rather than delaying it to wait until a formal committee through yourselves, when we have some wording and suggestions, we may engage with you councillors, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Susan, but we will engage with members of the Standards Committee informally to feed that back into the working group and Audit and Governance Committee in terms of the processes. So we will engage with you, but informally outside of a formal meeting.
Yes, but just to say, Richard, that's quite correct. But this committee is at liberty to recommend code of conduct issues directly to full council. Not the constitutional change, though. Is that what you're saying?
In relation to the code of conduct,
yes.
Yeah, I mean you are responsible for promoting and maintaining the ethical governance of the council and the ethical behaviours of councillors. So absolutely, anything in relation to that, yes, you can make those recommendations.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay. Is everybody in agreement that we recommend this?
Yes, Chairman.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I just come back, Chairman? As I was saying earlier, thinking of any further delay coming from the Governance Committee on standards in public life, that by April, after due consultation with other authorities, that this committee does have then the ability to actually take that forward to full council to have adopted with any tweaks or other amendments that come from the LGA, rather than further allowing it to go on much further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Good points. Richard, did you want to come in on that for Marcus?
Chairman, I was only going to raise exactly the same thing that Councillor Brooks has just raised, in terms of probably an informative note in the minute to say that should the recommendations not be considered by government, then we will put a recommendation to you to adopt the model code as it stands, or with modifications following the consultation.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you, Richard. Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, just a quickie. Obviously, we don't know when, because obviously lots of things are being pushed into the long grass, reference other bits and bobs due to COVID. That as and when this model code of conduct is there for us to adopt, and perhaps unfortunately it's just gone beyond one of our normal committee meetings, you know, it would be very good if because obviously we don't have meetings all the time, formal meetings, have lots of informal ones, that perhaps we could even have bring it forward and get it adopted as soon as possible by this committee with a recommendation to full council, because it would be disappointing if, you know, we missed the deadline for getting it onto the agenda of full council.
And sorry, Steve, perhaps we can call for an intervening standards meeting to actually do that, rather than leaving it in an informal meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews and Councillor Brooks. Susan, have you got any comments on those suggestions?
I just wanted to agree with Councillor Brooks. We'd have to call an additional meeting because it would need to be done in formal committee, but that's absolutely fine.
Okay, fine, thank you. Okay, is everybody in agreement that we follow the recommendation?
Agreed.
Agreed. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Agreed.
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 Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Well, that's the last item on the agenda this evening. So would like to wish you all good night, and thank you everyone who's watching out there. I don't quite know who is, but you know, if you're out there, thank you for watching, and good night. And I guess we'll cut the live stream. Thank you.